All right, let's go ahead and start our message. I want to welcome you back to our series on the book of Hebrews, New Priesthood, New Hope, New Covenant. Now, we are finishing chapter 9 today, and chapter 9 has built an argument. And sadly, we've been I schedule it purposely. The flow has been interrupted because we get speakers, etc. So to build the argument, I want to just backtrack just a little bit, as I normally do, and share with you where we have been previously in the book of Hebrews so that you can catch up with the flow of the argument. And just to give you an overview, a big picture, I want you to look again in chapter 9. Now, the numbers along the top row, that's the center of the chapter. So the first half of the chapter is on one side of the numbers, and the second half of the chapter is on the other side of the chapters, because the 9, 10, 11, they're all right there in the center of each chapter. So you can see what we covered in the first half of the chapter, which was the concepts of new high priest and the tabernacle and new sacrifice. But now we're wrapping up. And look at this. He's giving us even more, because we're going back and not only dealing with the stuff that we dealt with at the beginning of chapter 9, we're actually adding some more stuff. For example, going back and reinforcing the concept of new covenant that came back from chapter 9. So what we're going to see at the end of chapter 9, we're dealing with the major themes of Jesus as new high priest. Yeshua is our new high priest. We have a new covenant. He serves in a different type of tabernacle, the reality as opposed to the model. And he is indeed a new and perfect, once for all, we'll see that specifically today, sacrifice. And we're dealing with the major theme that goes across the book of, or at least the first 10 and a half chapters, is that we're dealing with the supremacy of Yeshua. Over what? Over everything. Chapter 9 began talking about the supremacy or the superiority of Messiah's priestly service. That's the first 10 verses. And then we began our section on the superiority of the Messiah's sacrifice. And that's going to take us all the way through the end of the chapter, which we'll deal with. We started last week, and we will finish up today. What we concluded, and as far as we got, is since the redemption that Yeshua obtained was eternal, the ineffective annual Levitical cycle was permanently broken. So Yeshua really does throw, in a sense, his actions, his person as high priest, his ability, his ministry as our sacrifice. These roles have thrown a monkey wrench into the Levitical cycle. And in fact, it permanently breaks the Levitical cycle, because what Jesus does is so far removed and superior from anything that Leviticus offered that it's a completely different issue. So we'll summarize the last few verses that we looked at. All right, this is going to dry. Pardon me if I lose my sanctification over this today, because this is really the bane of my existence today. But with a smile on my face, I will point out that we shouldn't be surprised that there are times when things change. The history of the world from the beginning has been one of God establishing a means of salvation and a means of relationship with him, and then it progresses. The old doesn't ever completely get thrown out, but new things come, and often circumstances change. Shall we say that? For example, there's a difference between the world of the Garden of Eden and post-Garden of Eden. There's a difference between the world pre-flood, became a very soggy, juicy place, and post-flood. Nobody can compare and say, oh, it's exactly as it was then. There was then, and then there was now. But the now gave way and became the then as the Mosaic covenant came, and a relationship with God became better defined, in fact, very seriously defined in a legislative code that God made specifically with the people of Israel. And once Yeshua came, the age of Moses gave way to the age of the church. It doesn't mean, again, I no sooner throw out Moses as I throw out Noah, because we're no longer in the post-flood era. I no sooner throw out Noah than I throw out Adam. I need to know my history. I need to know where I've been. But I also know I'm not in the Garden of Eden. And I'm not in the corrupt time period prior to the flood. I'm not living in the time of tabernacle and temple, when the laws of Moses governed the relationship with Israel and God. And if you wanted to know the God of Israel, you must come to Israel, to the central location. You must become part of the people of God following the Mosaic covenant. Because now we are in a post-Messiah Advent. We're in a time when our Messiah has given his life for us, has resurrected, has ascended, and been exalted. And no one could say that the time now when our Messiah is now on a throne at the right hand of God, his Father, sitting there until God makes his Son's enemies his footstool. No one can say that things haven't changed. The entire book of Hebrews, remember, it begins with in these last days. There was then, but this is now. And this church age will give way to a time of tribulation. And that will be a very different era from what we are experiencing now. In fact, it's my biblical conviction, we, the church, will not be part of it because we will be removed from this. It's appointed, we're not appointed to wrath, for goodness sake. But post-tribulation will also be very different. Continuity is God and God's plan and program, but it progressively adjusts over time. And we have such a time as now. Just like in the future, there will be a Messianic age that will not look like the tribulation, will not look like the church age, will not look like the age of the Mosaic covenant, will not look like anything else that has come before. That was then, this is now. Which is why in verse 11, he says, but when Christ appeared as the high priest of the good things to come. So there's a contrast. But when things are new now, he entered through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this creation, and not through the blood of goats and calves, but through his own blood, he entered the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. Now, we expounded upon those very potent words last week. If you missed that, or 2 weeks ago, if you missed that message, please go back and watch that message or listen to it, because it's very, very important. It's key to what Yeshua has accomplished for us and why it was necessary that we could not continue on offering the blood of goats and calves, but the superior blood of our Messiah has obtained eternal redemption for us once for all. Do not miss this term, once for all. Yom Kippur, the Levitical system, the temple, tabernacle before that, it's all about covering over sin. What Yeshua has done for us is about eradicating sin. So we saw three superior elements of Messiah's sacrifice. One, he is serving in a superior tabernacle. He is in the real deal, not a copy, not a model of the reality, the heavenly reality. He is in the heavenly reality. He is come through the means of sufficient and superior blood. And what Yeshua has done for us is sufficient. In other words, Dayenu, it's enough. And it's unrepeatable. Do you need to add one thing to what Yeshua has done in reconciling you to the Father? No. What he's done is sufficient. Doesn't need to be repeatedly sacrificed on a weekly or a monthly or an annual basis, a daily basis. No, one sacrifice. It's unrepeatable because its very sufficiency makes it unrepeatable. I may have an amazing meal. My wife may cook me an amazing meal. And I may say to Adria, I may say, sweetheart, that is the meal to end all meals. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to be hungry tomorrow, okay? It's even, no matter how great it was, it is a repeatable event. I want to eat again, okay? But Yeshua's sacrifice, unrepeatable because it is sufficient. All right, let's move on. The results of the Messiah's sacrifice, he has a superior ability to sanctify. Superior to what? Sanctify means to consecrate, to make you holy, to separate, to change your heart from the inside as opposed to just covering the surface. Yeshua, nobody's going to compare Yeshua's blood and his sacrifice to that of bulls and goats. It's not a comparison. Right? He ratified a superior covenant through his blood. And that's why I said, just as the blood of bulls and goats are very clearly inferior to the blood of Messiah, I have to say, with all my tip of the yarmulke and respect for the Mosaic covenant, the new covenant tops it. Right? And his ministry, as we just mentioned, is in a superior location, not in the tabernacle and not in even the glorious temple of Herod. His ministry is in the true reality, the Holy of Holies, the very presence of the Father, of God. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer, it's the red heifer, sprinkling those who have been defiled, sanctify for the cleansing of the flesh, that's where he's going to argue, cleansing the external, the flesh, how much more, very Jewish way to argue, if this is true, then how much more so, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit, that's the Holy Spirit, that's the Ruach HaKodesh, offered himself without blemish to God, how much more will he be able to cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? You are cleansed. You may not feel clean. You may have managed to defile yourself, somehow this week, doing something silly, foolish, wrong. But you are clean, and forgiveness is one request away and is always granted because of the superior blood of our Messiah. I mean, it was all, many of us have these high efficiency washers, right? Supposed to be better and superior. And we have the high efficiency detergents. You don't need to use, a whole cup of this. You could throw one little pod or whatever it may be. And look, your clothes. And truly, the cleaning power of many of our technological are terrific. But it doesn't mean that once your clothes are clean, that they're not going to get dirty again. This is how it was in the Mosaic covenant. You'd wash your clothes, they'd be clean, you'd get them dirty, you had to throw them in the washing machine again, over and over and over again, okay? Because what the laundry does is it gets out the external stain. But what Yeshua has done is it has cleansed the clothes of your life, both warp and woof. Inside, outside, there's no hidden stains. You're clean. He has made you clean. And what God has called clean, let no one call defiled. Therefore, we can serve the living God. For this reason, Yeshua, he, is the mediator of a new covenant. That's that new covenant that he spent a whole chapter on, chapter 8 on, so that since the death has taken place for the redemption of the transgression that was committed under the first covenant, i.e., the transgressions that were committed under the first covenant have been paid for by a death that took place. Yeshua's death took place for the transgressions that were committed under the first covenant. The first covenant did not have solutions for there were even the best washing machines, even the best detergents, even Tide with the Oxy. It can't get new. My apologies, Procter & Gamble or whoever makes you. There are some things that even the best detergent, some stains don't come out. And that's the way it was for the Mosaic covenant. There's a lot of stains, beautiful. But there are some stubborn stains that just simply could not be cleansed by the detergent. And the Mosaic covenant had some sins that simply, the capital punishment like we saw today. There's no sacrifice that you could do for the guy who blasphemed the name of God. No sacrifice that one could offer for taking the life of another human being. Capital punishment was the solution. But all the transgressions that couldn't be forgiven under the first covenant, the Mosaic covenant, can now be forgiven under the new covenant. So that's superior. It's got superior cleansing power and permanent cleansing power. Those who have been called, just a shout out for those who are confused, if you think you call up God, that you chose him. He called you first. You may have returned the phone. You may not have been paying attention to the phone ringing. And you may have had to redial, okay, or say, who called me? Let me hit the speed dial and get the last call. But nonetheless, the one who reached out to you, the one who called you, that's our Lord. Those who have been called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. What we have, what he's given us, is not just temporary cleansing, or not just the ability to serve, but we have an inheritance. And it is an eternal inheritance, one that goes on and on and on and on. So unlike the new covenant, God did not design the Mosaic covenant to provide redemption. Mosaic covenant only provided the covering of sin. By contrast, the new covenant provides definitive removal of sin. You're going to see this word again later today. Definitive removal of sin. For where a covenant is, and this is where we left off last week, and or 2 weeks ago, I pointed out that there is a wordplay here because covenant and testament are the same word in Greek, and so this is the word that was used for will. So where a covenant is, there must of necessity be the death of the one who made it. So if you have a last will and testament, the testator, in order for the will to be in effect, must kick off, okay? The will is not in effect while the guy making it is still on this earth breathing, okay? There is of necessity the death of the one who made it. For covenant is valid, a testament, a will, is valid only when men are dead. Never in force while the one who made it lives. Right? I hope that's understandable. Therefore, even the first covenant, the Mosaic covenant, was not inaugurated with blood. Now, sometimes the author of Hebrews, he speaks in a rhetorical way that is not as plain English as we would prefer, because he didn't write in plain English. So instead of saying even the first covenant was not inaugurated without blood, said, well, my point is that the first covenant, the Mosaic covenant, was inaugurated with blood. Okay, that's another way to just untwist the double negatives here. Not inaugurated without blood. It was inaugurated with blood. It took blood to inaugurate the first covenant, the Mosaic covenant. For when every commandment had been spoken by Moses to all the people according to the law, it's going back to Exodus, which we'll read in a second, he took the blood of the calves and the goats, and with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, that's how you sprinkle. And he sprinkled both the book itself, the scroll, some of the blood went on the book, and all the people. Talk about being in the splash zone, okay? Right? And he said, this is the blood of the covenant which God commanded you. I hope they had good detergent back then, okay? Because everybody's getting sprinkled with blood. Imagine, this is, we had a water balloon fight at school yesterday, and, we all got wet. But in the heat of the afternoon sun, we dried off pretty quickly. The blood doesn't dry off and go away, right? It doesn't just evaporate in the heat of the sun. That blood is a very, very powerful illustration, right literally in your face and on your flesh, on your body, on your clothing, as he sprinkles you, and sprinkle with the people, the blood of the covenant which God commanded you. See, here's the passage in Exodus 24, verses 6 through 8. Moses took, this is blood of goats and calves, but half of the blood, put it in basins. The other half of the blood, he sprinkled on the altar. So the altar also was sprinkled to ratify and to boot up, okay? The altar for worship required blood. He took the book of the covenant, read it in the hearing of the people, and they all said, this is the very famous statement that the Jewish people had said, Israel had said, so ironic, so well-intended, I'm sure, at the time. But as we look through the history of the Hebrew Bible, and then the New Testament, and then Jewish history, we see the tragic irony here. But nonetheless, that all that the Lord had spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient, at least until chapter 32, when we build a golden calf and worship it, and frolic in orgies in front of it to worship. We'll lay down to play. But now, hope springs eternal. All the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. If only the blood of bulls and calves sprinkled on the people had the effective, efficient power to change the internal mechanisms of their conscience and enable them to carry out their intentions. But alas, the blood of bulls and goats and calves only can hit the outside, the external. That's as far as the Mosaic covenant ever takes you. The external. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people. And he said, behold, the blood of the covenant, which the Lord has made with you in accordance with these words. Very similar to how Jesus introduces at the Last Supper, at the Passover Seder meal. He said, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. This is the blood of the covenant. It's my blood, not the blood of bulls and goats. That's what we do when we take communion. We remember this moment, not the moment that Moses sprinkled the people, but the moment that the Lord said to his disciples, I'm ratifying a new covenant. Not just yet, in a few hours, okay? Give me another day. But by tomorrow afternoon, it will be ratified. And the proof of its ratification will be seen on the third day when I rise. That's what we remember at communion. Anyway, contrast between what Moses did and what Yeshua did. Mosaic covenant, new covenant. In the same way, he sprinkled both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry with the blood. So not only the people, not only the altar, but all the tabernacle itself, the tent, and all the vessels, everything that was required, all the utensils needed to be sprinkled with blood. It needed to be covered with blood. That was just like you would, when you're when you're building a motor or an engine or even a hinge or whatever, you make sure that you coat it with oil because that will keep the hinge moving and that will keep, you wouldn't ever build a motor without lubricating it sufficiently with oil and keep everything smooth. So the blood, not that it helps, there's no moving parts in the utensils of the altar, but of the tabernacle, but it is that which is necessary to kick things off. And according to the law, it's a Torah, one may almost say, and in fact, Hebrew, again, stylistically, he's so quirky, this author of Hebrew. One may almost say, someone wrote somewhere, I'm not sure where it is, Psalms, but he does these kinds of quirky things. One may almost say, he's actually saying it, okay? Let me mention all the things that the temple, but I don't have time to talk about these now. Okay, I will talk about this instead. He's a quirky author. But he says, one may almost say, and he does say, all things are cleansed with blood. And without shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness. Where did he get this from? The key verse in Leviticus, right there, smack dab in the middle of the book, 17:11. It's the key memory verse in the book of Leviticus. For the life of the flesh is the blood, is in the blood. And I've given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls, covering for your souls. It is the blood by reason of the life that makes the covering, that makes the atonement. That's why human life is so much more valuable than animal blood, right? As we talked about this morning. But it is blood, the spilling of blood is required for atonement. There is no atonement without the spilling of blood. And just as very clearly in Leviticus, the life of human being was of much greater value, the blood of human being, much greater value than that of an animal, so too the life of God's Son, our Messiah, is the only human blood that has the ability to provide perfect, definitive atonement. But nonetheless, the concept is found right here in Leviticus 17. Therefore, because blood is necessary for atonement, Leviticus 17, therefore, it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be cleansed with these. So, just as the tabernacle is a model of what's in reality, saying the copies needed to be cleansed with the blood of bulls and goats. So the tabernacle had to be cleansed with blood in this location. Every implement related to the function of sanctuary worship would become corrupted over time, just as our clothes get dirty again after we wear them. And we can clean them. They don't stay clean after coming out of the laundry. But in Leviticus 16:16, which we read last week, you remember, Diane read this as part of our Torah portion. He shall make atonement for the holy place. Even what did the sanctuary do to anybody? What did the tabernacle do to anybody? You know, it's the impurity of the people, their sins that accumulate over the course of the year and even affect the holy place. So make atonement for the holy place because of the impurities of the sons of Israel and because of their transgressions in regard to all their sins. That's what defiles the holy place of God, is the sinfulness of man. And thus he shall do for the tent of meeting, which abides with them in the midst of their impurities. Something may go on in one part of a neighborhood or in one part of a house, and you say, what's that smell? What died? Well, something may have died or something may have gone amiss or who knows what in another area of the house or in the backyard or in another part of town. But nonetheless, the stench permeates. It was a terrible disaster in East Palestine. That's not Israel, that's, Ohio. And the stench of that disaster, it's still permeated. It happened in a location, but it's spread. And that's the sins of the people spread over the course of the year through the tabernacle because of their impurities. But the heavenly things themselves are cleansed with better sacrifices than these, by which he means the blood of the Messiah. For Christ did not enter a holy place made with hands, a mere copy of the true one. We've seen this concept before. He's argued this point before. Even the beautiful second temple that Herod built. Christ, our Messiah, never entered into the temple proper. He was in the temple courts, of course, like all the men of Israel. But he did not get into the inner courtyard of the priests. He certainly never entered into the temple itself. Had every right, but he didn't because he was of the tribe of Judah, not of the tribe of Levi. He was not a priest according to the Levitical requirements. But into heaven himself is where he entered, now to appear in the presence of God. For a family reunion, I'm sure that's lovely. But he gives us the reason here. Everything Messiah did for us was for us. He didn't need to reconcile himself to his Father. He was reconciled to his Father from the before the foundations of the earth. He's eternal. And they have eternally been in relationship together. He did everything he did for us because he loves us. Well, the heavenly sanctuary is in some fashion far beyond our mortal comprehension, has a material aspect to it because it speaks of this in that way. Messiah has a material body. It's glorified, resurrected body. And he's not going back to pre-incarnation status. He doesn't go backwards. He only goes forward in time. And therefore, there is a physical aspect to the very he's not living in a glorified, resurrected body and sitting on an invisible spiritual throne. It's a real throne, sitting really next to his Father with really but it's beyond my comprehension. I don't understand exactly the mechanics or the physics of it, and I don't need to. We'll find out. Stay tuned. But author of Hebrews basically giving us the great rule of real estate. Location, 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 with three great rules of real estate. And a superior location cannot be underestimated, is what he is saying. Let's continue. Nor was it that he would offer himself often. Look, the aspect of the once for all, as opposed to the repeatedly, which was alluded to earlier, I pointed out, is going to be hammered here. So I've highlighted the word often, because remember, he's thinking in terms of Day of Atonement, of Yom Kippur. We have, unlike the Levitical high priests, who repeatedly, annually, once a year, enter the Holy of Holies, keep going back. Day of Atonement comes around every year, right? Like the, will the great pumpkin yeah, sure. Great pumpkin comes around every year, right? So too, Day of Atonement comes around every year. We observe the Jewish holidays come around every year. But praise the Lord, we are no longer under the system that requires the shedding of blood on our behalf, inferior blood, over and over and over again, year after year after year after year after year. Yeshua's entrance into the holy place was once in an eternity, an unrepeatable event. He would not offer himself often as the high priest enters the holy place year by year with blood that is not his own, unlike Yeshua, who came through his own blood. The high priest, by way of illustration. To the fact that it was necessary to annually observe the Day of Atonement exposes the inherent insufficiency of every Levitical offering ever presented over the prior 15 centuries. Who is he talking to? The author of Hebrews is talking to Jewish people who are very attached, as understandable. This is the history and theology and national requirements. This is everything. The temple had been everything. The tabernacle prior to that had been everything to the Jewish people as a way of relating to God for 1,500 years. But what the author of Hebrews is arguing is now that Yeshua has come, it exposes that the system was not perfect. It didn't accomplish everything that Yeshua does because it was inherently insufficient. Every Levitical, not just Day of Atonement, but especially Day of Atonement, and if Day of Atonement, then of course, which is the biggest sacrifice of the year, then how much more so all the daily, twice daily sacrifice. The inherent insufficiency of every Levitical offering that was ever presented over the prior 15 centuries. Yeshua, it's like when you're walking around with the wrong prescription and, you know, it's been a while since you've been to the eye doctor or whatever, or even better, the light in your bathroom, you know, is not that great. It's just good enough. And you're doing your makeup or you're shaving or whatever. And, you know, but all of a sudden, like you go to, you know, a hotel or a restaurant, whatever, that has really good bathroom lighting, and you look in the mirror and you say, ho, ho. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, okay? But I didn't realize that the mighty had fallen so far, so quickly. I didn't realize, I missed some of the fine details. Or, you know, the ability when we finally got the high definition TV and the big screen, you know, and all of a sudden you're looking at the news anchors, you know, and say, oh, I see your pores. I see that blemish you're trying to hide with pancake. I see, it's there. High definition doesn't hide anything. And so Yeshua shines a high definition camera or floodlight over the Levitical system, and you can now see, oh yeah, insufficient. Otherwise, he would have needed to suffer often since the foundation of the world. So you see the term often. The Levitical priest serves often, frequently, annually. And Yeshua, if his blood was not superior, if his sacrifice was not superior, he would have needed to suffer often. How often? Since the foundation of the world. But Jesus is not going to be offering himself repeatedly. No animal's blood ever going to prove adequate to do more than cover sin. And Jesus' sacrifice is the only means through which we have a satisfactory offering in the presence of God. So with all my respect for people who have different opinions of various different denominations and sects who teach that our Messiah must be sacrificed repeatedly, and that each Mass or each Eucharistic service, or it's a repeated sacrifice that's taking place in real time, in this locality, in every church, in every service, in every Mass throughout Christendom. This is telling you it's not true. There is no repeated sacrifice. This is not often. There's clarity. There's lack of ambiguity here. What's unambiguous? The finality, the unrepeatability, the non-reproducible nature of Jesus' definitive sacrifice accomplishment on the cross. It precludes the idea of an eternal sacrifice, a perpetual sacrifice, or even a single representation of that sacrifice before the throne of God. It's a pretty strong argument here that the intrinsic inadequacy of the Day of Atonement shows not only the inferiority of blood, but the ritual's need for annual repetition. I've already made that point many times, as the author of Hebrews has. But now once in contrast to often, right? Just highlighting that for you. But now now. That was then. This is now. Now. But now. Once. When? At the consummation of the ages. That's what he's saying. Once for all times. And these final days, he starts the book with the same idea, the consummation of the age that we're living. Now we're in a new era. A new, I could even say, dispensation. Once at the consummation of the, remember, chapter 1, verse 2, begins in these last days. This is the end times, final days. This is a new era. This is the church age. There's a sharp division between, well, our calendar reflects it as well, BC and AD. Even our calendar reflects the reality of what the author of Hebrews is saying. In these last days, at the consummation of the age, once he has been manifested to once put away sin. How? By once the sacrifice of himself. He has put away sin. I have that highlighted for you as well. What does it mean to put away sin? We have seen this legal term before in chapter 7. It means exactly the same thing as it meant then, annulment, and that reference, it was the annulment of the Torah. He is saying he has annulled sin. It is the annulment of a decree, the cancellation of a debt. He set something aside. We are no longer under the power of sin, in other words. Through his bloody sacrificial death, let's not forget that. Yeshua has removed sin. He has set it aside. He has forever annulled it and its power. Yeshua has sent sin a notice of cancellation. You are canceled. You have no power here. Let's finish up. And inasmuch as it's appointed for men to die once, and after this comes judgment, except in the case of James Bond, you only live twice. But inasmuch as it's appointed for men to die once, and after that, the judgment. This is again the concept of once versus often. Yeshua, this is not making an argument against reincarnation, although very clearly, if you die once and then you're judged, then that argues, it precludes all the other religious ideas regarding reincarnation or returning to the eternal one and the cyclical cycle of rebirth. No, once, you have one life and then comes judgment. That's true theologically, but that's not where he's arguing here. He's arguing about Yeshua. So just like Yeshua, like man, you die once, and then the results. So too Yeshua died once, not repeatedly, and then comes judgment. So Christ also, having been offered, is that term, once, to bear the sins of many, comes from Isaiah 53, the great passage, Isaiah 53:12. Therefore I will allot him a portion with the great, and he will divide the booty with the strong, because he poured himself out to death and was numbered with the transgressors, yet he himself bore the sin of many and interceded for the transgressors. So, that's this last verse. Christ also, our Messiah, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second. So, just like men die and then judgment, so too Christ died and he's coming back for judgment. Okay? He will appear a second time for our salvation without reference to sin, to those who eagerly await. Without reference to sin, for those who eagerly await him. In conclusion, when our Messiah returns, it will not be to provide an additional act of sacrifice. That's not happening now, and it's certainly not going to happen when he returns. His return engagement will have no reference to solving the problem of sin, because that problem has already been solved definitively. Yeshua's second coming will serve as the final typological fulfillment, the prophetic fulfillment of Yom Kippur, of the Day of Atonement. How so? Well, the nation of Israel, you know what's coming. The nation of Israel will experience an unprecedented affliction of both body and soul during the coming tribulation, the period that the Hebrew Bible refers to as the time of Jacob's or Israel's trouble, specifically in reference to the Jewish people. But Zechariah has really good news. He says, I will pour, this is Zechariah 12:10 and 13:1. Smash them together. I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplication. Say, will they look on me, whom they have pierced? Whom they have pierced. When did the Jewish people pierce God? One moment and hit once, when all of us, Jew and Gentile alike, did as well. And they will mourn for him, as one mourns for an only son, and they will weep bitterly over him like the bitter weeping over a firstborn, the loss of a firstborn son. But 13 begins, in that day, a fountain will be opened for the house of David and for the inhabitants of Jerusalem for sin and for impurity. What's happening? See, Yeshua is coming for those who eagerly await him, as Hebrews phrases it. He's coming for those who eagerly await him to do what? To bring salvation from this age of tribulation, and to bring them into the inauguration of the next, the Messianic era, as he establishes his rule and reign over his kingdom. Yeshua is returning. We know the end of the story. We are living sometime between the middle of the story and the end. Just how close we are to the final pages of this particular chapter is unclear, although I believe it seems to be getting clearer and clearer with each passing day, in my opinion. as I read the weather report. But I can tell you that our Messiah, wherever we are in God's plan and program, which all we know right now is that we are in the church age, what Hebrews calls the last days or the new age, final age, before tribulation and Messianic era is established. I know that we can be reconciled. We have been reconciled to God through the blood of our Messiah. I know that our sins are forgiven, and that should have a tremendous liberating effect on our lifestyles, on our attitudes. What do you got to throw at me, world? What do you have to throw at us, culture? Oh, boo-hoo, it's so hard out there. The world is getting so dangerous, and everything is turning upside down. You know what's not upside down? The Messiah. God's plan, this is all according to his plan. You think it's all going to get better and better and better and better until the end? Otherwise, you don't need the end, right? If the Messianic age is going to dawn within the church age, you don't need all the rest of it. It's going to get worse, culminating in a time of tribulation. Will be taken out. But nonetheless, until that point, don't expect that from here on in. It would be nice to be able to think, as we age, that things will be easier. You got things lined up for you, and everything's going to get better, and it's all going to be wine and roses. I don't think it is. I think our children and our grandchildren are going to be living in a world that's far different and in a culture that's far more hostile to the people of God than we have experienced thus far. We're beginning to see it now. But do not be disheartened. Do not be surprised, because our Messiah has overcome the world. And if he has overcome the world, so too are we. We are overcomers. And therefore, we can look with hope, and we can strengthen our spines, and we can keep our knees from wobbling and buckling, and stiffen our purpose and our resolve, and press forward to serve our living God through the power and sacrifice of our Messiah. Let's stand for the Aaronic benediction. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav alecha v'chunecha, Yisa Adonai panav alecha v'yasem lecha, Shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.